I was recently asked to play pickleball, and I was hesitant for a few minutes before I agreed to do so because I had kind of avoided the sport. I've heard a lot about it. I heard it's very fun, but for me, the people that were playing seemed like grown-ups. Seemed like a grown-up sport. Seemed like something adults do, and I never remember or imagine myself to be an adult, even though my age tells a very different story. I am not mentally or maturity wise in the adult or grown up category, but I agreed to play and I had a blast. Oh my God, I loved it way more than I ever imagined or anticipated I would. And I thought it was the greatest thing ever, next to skateboarding. I kind of think it's because two sports I've never done. So if I knew and I could tell at the introduction of pickleball that if I kept playing, I'd figure out the strategy. I'd figure out that I'd progress pretty quickly, only because the tennis kind of came out and my history in playing racket sports. And then, of course, with skateboarding, it's that the fact that I've never done it before. So the progression, I'm not good by any means. Anything I do is something new and different and leveling myself up, whether it's just rolling around the skate park or rolling into a bowl. Everything I do makes me feel like I've accomplished something great because it's not an easy sport. It's not an easy activity. It's not an easy thing to do being on a skateboard. And pickleball isn't either. It's fairly, I think, simple to get the ball back and forth, but to get into the strategy and to get really into the game. Honestly, the scoring for me was the most difficult thing to figure out. Well, I came home from that day, my first day of pickleball, and I couldn't wait to have them contact me again for another game. And my neighbor, who had given the pickleball neighbors my contact information, saw me, and I definitely had a skip in my step. I mean, I was just on cloud nine. And she had asked me how it had gone, and I thanked her very much for sharing my info. And she kind of laughed and said, I like your outfit. But there was a hint of sarcasm, and I thought, God, what did I put on? I mean, I did get ready really quick when the offer came, and I got myself ready. What do I have on? So I looked down, and I'm very appropriately dressed, well, almost appropriately dressed for pickleball. I've got my tennis shoes and my tennis skirt. And then I realized we were going to the skate park, of course, afterwards, as we do every day. And I've got my typical daily wear, which is skateboard or skate park clothes, which is any random t-shirt I can find, the first one I can grab, it which usually entails a band t-shirt of my random eclectic taste in music. Sure enough, I've got a Slayer tank top with my tennis skirt. Didn't even think about it. And I thought, I guess I really am still that person that doesn't actually fit in anywhere, but almost fits in everywhere. I'm Nikki Lynn Chase, and this is my podcast, Adult Chicken, and it's about my journey, my adventure, about navigating life's unexpected as a mom to two special needs kids. It was sports that kept us kind of included in everything when we were kids. If you've heard any of the past episodes of my podcast, you know that my parents were assholes. So it wasn't their amazing congenial personalities that kept us keeping up with the Joneses and likable people of the community. It was the fact that they played sports and they played sports well. And both my parents worked in the sports industry. When my brother and I were first born, both my parents were ski instructors, and they had chosen to raise us. They had bought a house and chosen to raise us in a very mid to upper, mostly upper class community in Colorado, and it was called the Broadmoor. It was a five-star hotel, and it is a historic resort in that part of Colorado. It's kind of nestled into the Cheyenne Mountain area, and the Broadmoor had carved out on the mountain a B for Broadmoor, and that was the ski area. They called it a ski area, even though it was just one run, the straight part of the capital B, and then two half circles. And if you could ski the Broadmoor, you could ski anywhere. It was the most treacherous, icy, steep quote unquote ski area that existed. And my mom was teaching young kids, and I was just a baby. She put me on her back in a child back seat or backpack. And I literally learned to ski when I learned to walk. I mean, it's simultaneous. It went together. I'd listened to so many lessons in her teaching that I could actually ski almost as well as I could walk. Then moving forward, elementary school, my dad ran the country club, so the tennis facility, and that was our in to being able to keep up with the Joneses in the tennis community. And my mom ran the tennis shop, so we were outfitted in equipment, tennis clothes, and we had kind of the best equipment simply because, well, we got it for free. Not for totally for free. We had to work for our stuff that my mom got us at cost, and that's how we fit in. Now, I wasn't that into it. I mean, I had so many other interests. I did really enjoy tennis. There was so much of it in our house. So we'd go to school, we'd come home, we'd just go straight to the tennis club, and that's where we hung out every single day. And I wanted to do what some of the other kids were doing. I begged to go to cotillion. I don't know what kid begs to go to cotillion, but it seemed like the social outlet. I guess that was about in junior high school. I begged to take piano lessons, and my mom just refused. I think it was because of the added expense to every and all activity I wanted to do. I carried a little added expense. We weren't quite we didn't quite fit in the demographic of the upper class, but she wanted to keep up with the Joneses. But she was a cheap, very frugal and cheap woman, and she didn't spend any extra money. I mean, I guess the one defense I'll give to her is she could make $1 stretch out for eternity. But she did not spend her money on me. But I begged. I wanted so badly to get into music. And I don't think I had. Maybe she understood that I didn't have a musical bone in my body, but I really, really wanted to. The other kids were doing it. They were getting into music. People were trying out band instruments at school. And that was a no, you're not going to join the band, so why bother? And then my very best friend growing up, unlike my parents, she had awesome parents. Her parents were the nicest people in town. In fact, her mom was so popular that when kids would run away from home, they'd run over to her house, and she was the town piano teacher. She taught everybody we knew piano lessons, and I wanted to take piano lessons more than anything. I wanted to learn music. I enjoyed music, always have. Again, I have very eclectic taste, and I don't think I have a musical bone in my body, but I love music. And I was never really allowed to, but being that I'd spent so much time because it was my best friend's house, Mrs. Clark asked me if I wanted to be part of a recital at one point. And I said, oh my gosh, I'd give anything. And it wasn't to play music, but she was going to give me a part. A student of hers, was going to play the Ghostbusters theme song. And I thought, I know that. I know it so well. And she recognized the performer in me. I was always doing shows and in entertaining whoever would watch me. And so the recital was being hosted at a very prominent family's house. So it was kind of a mansion. And all of the kids showed up in there. The girls were wearing velvet dresses. It's more or less the middle of winter, and they're wearing velvet dresses with the white collars, very cotillion-esque, very fancy. The boys all wore suits. And I thought I was ready for this. I had invested in an outfit at the Esprit outlet. Esprit was a big name brand, and it was very out of season. It was very much a spring outfit, which is why it was probably at the outlet store and in my price range. I remember exactly. It was this springy peach gingham dress, and I just thought I was adorable. And I get there, and it's a very formal occasion, and I think to myself, I'm just going to bring my own Nikki flavor. And I'm a little bit, I was never given any credit for being observant. But I was observant, but a little bit unaware. I just kind of was almost the eternal optimist, everything's great. We're all humans. And I felt important that I was a part of it. I felt equally as important as the kids that had spent, their parents had spent all the money to have Mrs. Clark teach them, and they'd spent and put in all the time for their kids to play at this recital, and it was a big day. And it's this kid's turn to play his piece, and I have brought a sheet. I'm going to really spice things up in my Nikki kind of way. And Mrs. Clark hands me the music. And this is my time to shine. This is about me, I think. I'm totally unaware that this poor kid has worked his ass off and probably spent hours and hours and days and months working on the few pieces that he had prepared. And this was a big one. But for me, this was my fitting in and my first recital I've been invited to and been made part of. So I'm under this sheet getting ready, and Mrs. Clark has given me the music. Now, I've never read music before. It's like reading a foreign language to me. I have no idea how to read music. And he keeps playing, and it kind of sounds like he keeps playing the same thing, and he was playing the introduction. But I had no idea where to come in or how to start singing. I knew the song, and I kind of froze a little bit. Miss Clark, most animated, amazing, awesome person, and she puts her head under and she's trying to keep things somewhat comfortable and trying to probably ease the mind of this poor kid who's busted his ass to do this recital. And she's like, okay, Nikki, and then kind of gives me a real quick 5 second, like, here's where you come in. But I didn't learn how to read music. I still had no idea. So I thought, okay, you better save the day. You better save yourself, and you better save this kid's poor thing that you're absolutely destroying. His whole piece, it's ruined. So all of a sudden, I just break into song and I belt out Ghostbusters and I start saying, everybody, sing along. Ghostbusters, who you gonna call? Ghostbusters. And I can see out. I put holes in the sheet and I can see out kind of sideways. I can half see the audience, and all of a sudden I hear everybody singing along with the song. And I was so proud of myself. I think that kid walked off so humbled and so embarrassed and mortified, and it probably took a lot to get him back into piano after I completely destroyed his efforts in putting this song together. But I had this epiphany, and I thought, oh my gosh, I just had the most pretentious, stuffy crowd that I knew singing along and really loosening up. And I thought, they're just humans. I know a lot of their stories. I knew at the time a lot of, a kid's version of the background of some of these parents. And I thought, you know what? We're all human. But I felt like I'd really found the commonality, and it was everybody knew this song and we could all sing along. And it just, for whatever reason, was like the epiphany of a lifetime for me at that time, because I'm thinking, wow, music, right? It can bring so many different people together. I knew I wasn't one of them. My parents were not. We as a family were not part of this group. I think some of it was intentional, and I think some of it was we just didn't fit in, economically speaking, with this group of people. But as soon as I start singing a song that we all know, kind of forcefully make people try to make the poor kid whose life I'm destroying at the very hands of my terrible singing and my uneducated musical mind, I got everybody to sing, and it transformed. I felt that it transformed the whole entire recital. Well, the interesting thing about where I went to school was it was very small. The community was small, and the 3 elementary schools fed into one junior high school. That junior high school fed into one high school. So whatever you did kind of followed your path through the 12th grade. And that was sort of difficult. It was at least difficult for me. I think between the recital and various events like the recital, I developed a reputation. It wasn't a bad reputation, but it wasn't a good reputation. I was kind of the weirdo. And the truth is, nowadays, you're kind of cool if you're different or off or eclectic. And back in the day when I was growing up, being sort of weird, off, different, that or unique wasn't really what you wanted. And I was kind of all of those things in addition to being awkward and just kind of a weirdo. Now it makes you an influencer. Back then it just made you a weirdo, and I was kind of a weirdo. It was kind of the reputation that carried me through high school. But once I got to high school, I started thinking to myself, at this time, my parents had gotten divorced, and my dad had gone from the tennis facility, moved to Vail, and is now back to teaching skiing. So now he's a ski instructor in Vail. By the time I'm in high school, my mom's going just batshit crazy and off the rails and becoming this drunk alcoholic, sort of taking everything in, sort of trying to fix my reputation a little bit and not be such an awkward weirdo. The music never took, although I loved any and all bands. I was really introduced to a lot more bands when I finally made the choice to go on a mission and find people maybe a little more accepting of my uniqueness, my weirdness, my differentness. And I found, and I mentioned this in a past episode, I found my little eclectic group in a house full of skateboarders. They were artistic. A lot of them were extremely brilliant and smart, and they were definitely different kids than the majority of the kids that I was going to school with. And I loved that. I liked the diversity. I liked their interests. We shared interests. And at the same time, I never skateboarded back then, but at the same time, this is the late 80s and the early 90s, snowboarding's making a bit of an introduction. And part of finding that group was very satisfying because I knew a group of skateboarders was very different from the tennis families we'd been put together with as we were growing up, or the ski families. You know, we spent a lot of time going to the mountains for skiing. But the skateboard crowd was a different crowd, and I knew that that would probably irritate my parents. They would not like that I was hanging out. That to them was riffraff. And because my dad was a ski instructor, and at the very beginning of snowboarding, you know, the life of snowboarding, it wasn't even allowed on the mountains where skiing was allowed. So it wasn't allowed at most resorts. Sport that is literally not allowed on the mountain where he goes and where he teaches people. That was really a draw for me, because I thought nothing will make him angrier than taking up a sport that isn't even allowed. It's so taboo. And I started snowboarding, and eventually they start letting it in certain sections of, in particular, Vail Mountain. And I had a pass to Vail. And I knew the second I strapped into a snowboard, I was never going to ski again. I absolutely loved it. I loved snowboarding so much, it brought me to the town where my dad lived, which was shocking that I wanted to be in such a small town where my dad was, but I loved it. And the fact that he worked once again at now it wasn't the tennis facility, so we didn't have the tennis perks, but now he works on the mountain. So I've got, my brother and I both have all the perks of a mountain pass, so we could go snowboarding, or my brother continued skiing. He could ski whenever he wanted, and I could snowboard whenever I wanted. And what I loved was kind of the same thing that I ended up embracing in my early days of ruining a kid's recital and piano career. I loved, not only did I love snowboarding, but I loved here I was residing in this gazillion-dollar ski town, and I loved that you'd have the people that were coming in, you know, to visit, and they were coming in from various countries, and they came from so much money. You have to have a lot of money to travel to Vail. Typically, it's not an easy trip to make and not spend much money. It's expensive. It's always been expensive. So you've got this high-end clientele, and then you've got the skiers and the snowboarders that run lifts, or they're working retail, or they're doing whatever, anything and everything that they can do to scrounge up enough money for rent and to just live this lifestyle. And I loved that. I loved seeing the two worlds collide or embrace each other and mesh. And it was very interesting. I felt like I was just living in a social experiment constantly when I lived in Vail. And I got into retail. That was sort of the easy and the obvious. I had done it for so many years with my mom having a tennis shop. So I kind of understood it. I knew it well, and I I was pretty okay at it. I hated it, but it was kind of what you did. And then I realized I needed to make a little bit more money, and the real money was in the bar business because everybody more or less parties in the mountains, And I started out cocktail waitressing. I worked at a German place where I wore a dirndl. And I started really picking up on the fact that, the smaller the top of the dirndl, or the more I could get my boobs to come out, the better the tips were. And I understood that well. And it was more or less all about making more money. So further out the boobs came. And keep in mind at this time, Coyote Ugly has come out. And I don't remember there being any female bartenders in Vail at the time. And I had watched Coyote Ugly. And this, again, to date myself, this is when people advertised they had jobs available in the classified. So I'm reading the newspaper and somebody's advertising that they've bought this bar and they need bartenders. And I thought, I really like that movie Coyote Ugly. I really like to perform. If I could combine my performance skills with bartending, I bet I could make some like serious money here. So I went and met up with the guy that had just bought the bar, and it was a kid. We were both kids. I mean, this is years ago, but he had inherited this huge trust fund and just decided he was going to buy this bar and run it. And we're both kind of bullshitting each other. I had no idea, but he's telling me about his goal. He's seemingly kind of professional. And he's asking me about my experience. I'm like, oh, I have so much experience bartending. I'd never bartended in my entire life. I think I learned how to pour keg beer. I know I did. And I could serve white and red wine, but I didn't know how to make a single. I could serve shots, but I didn't know how to make any kind of drink. And so he hired me. I was maybe one of the first ones on shift. Had no idea what I was doing. But I quickly realized he too had no idea what he was doing. So we kind of had a laugh and just sort of shook hands and agreed that we would just wing it and we would make this work. And people started coming in. And again, I felt like I was doing this social experiment where I know a lot of the ski clientele from my retail job, and also the fact that my dad has been now in Vail. He'd been there for years and everybody knew him, notoriously known, but everybody knew him as the grumpy staple and fixture of Vail. And then everybody, I'd known so many people, it's a very small town. And then I also knew all the locals because, again, it's a very small town. And I loved watching everybody come in, and you'd have these pretentious mink coat wearing men and women alike, and they'd come in and order some drink I'd never ever heard of. And then you'd have some of the locals come in and they would want, just a beer, or again, I'm a lot younger at that time. And so the people I knew and was friends with would order shots, not just like a shot of tequila. We weren't quite old enough to handle just a shot of tequila, although of course that happened, but fancy shots, lemon drops or what have you. Now, mind you, I have no idea what I'm doing, no idea how to make a cocktail. I have no idea how to make anything. So with the fancy people that were ordering things, I had no idea what they were ordering. I would give them something and they're like, oh, this isn't it. Kind of be snotty because starting out a little bit sober, and I'd say, you know what, you're right. Why don't I make you a Nikki special? And every week I'd come up with some concoction. I'd read in a bartender magazine what ingredients, and then it would be good enough, and I'd kind of try to sell that. Listen, tonight's special is, and I'd watch them get progressively more hammered, and then you give them enough alcohol and everything else, and you make it fun to hang out there. People stayed forever. And then the locals would come in. These are guys and gals alike, that most of us don't know how we're going to make ends meet once the snow melts and the mountain shuts down. We've got summer season, but we're just trying to make $1 to make it another day. And they'd come in and they were pretty easy to make happy. And I realized, just smile, just smile, just smile. Again, reflecting back on that recital, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea how to read music. I have no idea how to make drinks. Smile. Smile and remember they're all human. And again, it was so intriguing to watch them mesh. They'd come in as two very different people, meaning the rich and the not so rich. But they came in for one thing, or two things, right? Alcohol and just a good time. And sometimes they collided, but usually with the right recipe of smiling and good vibes, everybody had a blast. And it was the most money I've probably ever made in my lifetime. It was so much money. I was the worst bartender in probably all of Vale. I did not know how to make a drink, but we had the busiest bar in the world. I took my knowledge, my education from my dirndl days as a cocktail waitress at the German place, where I knew the more cleavage I showed, the better the tips. And it was no different. And I just pulled the coyote ugly. And fortunately, the guy that was running the bar, again, we probably weren't up to code on anything, but he'd let me jump up when I saw fit and I'd get to perform. I didn't sing, but I would dance. Horrible dancer. Absolutely horrible dancer. But we all had a good time. I mean, it was a party that I was getting paid for every single night that I worked. And it was just putting hundreds and hundreds of dollars in my pocket. Then I got married and then I had kids. And then my job in the retail area had turned more into a career. And that was great. But then Sandler, when he got really sick, I mean, that was the first few months of his life. And he was not surviving or thriving. And that's when I ended up not having a job. I had to quit my job between childcare and the amount of time I had to take off to make sure that he was okay. It just, working wasn't conducive to surviving, actually, or thriving. And then everything went to shit in a handbasket with my marriage. And then we made the unexpected reroute of our lives. And I took the two kids, three duffel bags, two kids, and myself, and relocated. So we'd gone to the Cayman Islands for that month, and then now we're in Tacoma. And now it's very different life. I went from being in a resort town years before this. I was making hundreds of dollars a night, and I was living in Vail, Colorado, and now I'm a single mom with absolutely no money, and I'm on food stamps or an EBT card and state assistance. And we live in Tacoma, Washington. Still a beautiful place, just very different place. I had a view of the sound, and I'd gotten the kids safe, and that was my main objective and goal, was to keep them healthy and keep them safe. But I did maneuver. I learned how to be very careful and learned how to maneuver and work to get the groceries through self checkout because my main concern was I always, every time I went to the grocery store when we were in Washington, I think back to Terms of Endearment, where the mom was struggling so hard and the kids wanted candy bars and she couldn't afford the candy bars, so she let them get them, and then the clerk was being so rude and she had to put them back, and I thought, I never want that to happen. Not when I'm checking out with my EBT card. And so I was very careful to kind of calculate as I'd go along so that I didn't have to scan something and then ask them to return it. I never wanted to have the Terms of Endearment experience. But all of a sudden I realized I was living a very different life. And of course, my circle of friends, well, that was gone. I didn't have one. And then I had a very small radius of people to network with because we didn't have a car. And so I had buddied up with a neighbor girl and her friend. And I can't say I made a great choice. It's just I didn't have very many choices in the friend department. But they had asked me if I wanted to go out one night. And I said, oh, heck yes. I would love to go out. And they had one of their daughters was going to babysit for my kids. And this was one of 3 nights the entire year I went out and did something without my children. So, well, I didn't go out with my children or without, but this was one night, and they said, we're going to go to a clubhouse. And I only heard clubhouse, and I thought, that sounds great. It sounds very inclusive. I really had no idea what a clubhouse meant or what I was getting into. I was so excited to be doing something with adults. It just sounded awesome. And so, was it a bar? Is it a like what do I wear? And they're like, just like kind of casual. But their casual was very different than mine. And they also knew what we were doing and where we were going. I had no idea. I'm thinking in my naive, stupid, just moved here from the mountains kind of way, a clubhouse. Like that just sounds cozy. It was kind of cold out, rainy, of course, and a clubhouse. That sounds great. Cozy. I'll wear a sweater. I'll wear some leggings. I'll wear my cowboy boots, actually. Well, they show up to get me and they don't have much on. And I'm thinking, huh, well, they're very advanced. They're a lot more advanced than I am. And they look sexy and they look amazing. And I look like I've just gone to like a parent teacher conference in the mountains. I mean, the sweater was at least a little sheer. I had a tank top underneath it, but whatever, I don't really care. And we end up meeting up with some guys that take us to their clubhouse, which is in a warehouse with a big chain link fence around it. And it's very intimidating. And it was nothing like I guess I had imagined. I don't even know. I didn't really imagine anything, but this was not what I expected. And, I kind of take in, again, I'm observant. I realized real quickly that I need to go to a different part of my life. And that was when we went to see one of our pseudo relatives, an uncle who was doing some time at a lookout tower. And he had some friends that were motorcycle enthusiasts. And I remember picking up real quick when we hung out with him, sort of the behavior. And you just you're cool. You don't run your mouth too much, and you kind of cool with everything. And I thought, okay, you know what? You be resourceful. Go to that time in your life. I was much younger at that time, of course, but I just kind of thought, okay, just be cool. But in the clubhouse, there was a bar, and there was a stage, and it had a pole. And I thought, well, there's my comfort zone. Not so much the pole. I don't really know. I'm not real. I guess my rhythm doesn't, my acrobatics and my rhythm doesn't have a lot of experience on the pole. But I saw my opportunity to perform, which is my comfort place. Again, the recital. Every part of junior high and high school where I got the chance to do air band or get on stage. I wasn't a theater person, but I would do intermission comedy and whatever I could, kind of just to do my own thing. But that was my safe place at this clubhouse because I was so out of my comfort zone. And I thought, well, holy shit, I'm going to get up there and dance. And I remember turning around, and the gals that I had gone with, I'm not certain that they didn't have experience on the stage with poles, because they were very good at utilizing the equipment there. And I just remember I got up there and just started to dance just to my own beat. And I'm not sure what the conversation was. I walked up to it after a good run on the dance floor or at the stage. And I walked into the conversation, and it had something to do with my kids being special needs. And I'm not certain that my friends weren't trying to convince them that I might be special to not be guilty by association. But it was just another part of my life or another situation where I told myself, don't be intimidated by any of this. Everybody's human. These guys are great. They were gentlemen. They were very kind. They were definitely motorcycle enthusiasts as well. And it was fine. And I just kept saying, they're humans. They are just like you. And I enjoyed that very much. I didn't need to do it again. And I realized I watched the two different humans mesh. Like, there's the commonality. And for me, the commonality was the dance floor. For them, it was probably like just intriguing to see this mom who hadn't been away from her children quite some time, or been out on the town just, wow, it was probably like watching something in a zoo, a wild creature, kind of unexpected. I think I threw them off more than they threw me off. After my fun at the clubhouse, I remained friends for the duration of my being in Tacoma with the gals, and we'd run into the guys from the clubhouse here and there, and it was fun. It was fun to see them outside of that experience and be buddies, with people I known. Everybody in Tacoma, I didn't know anybody in Tacoma. So everybody I ran into or became friends with was somebody new and different. And then to see them in a different context was always interesting and fun, typically. And then we end up in Southern California. And that's when we, of course, get back into the skateboarding world because of Sandler. And I start just really enjoying that. And that I've mentioned also in past podcasts. It is, or past episodes, talk about a social experiment. We spend almost every waking hour at a skate park or amongst skateboarders. Now I'm with adults. Most of these parents grew up skating, and we even have mutual friends. The skating community is so small that they know the skaters I know from Colorado and vice versa. And it's fun because we all know each other. And then the merging of skateboarding into snowboarding, there's that whole pocket of people. So I get to Southern California, and a lot of the snowboarding community is mixed in with the skate community, and it's just cool. And it's cool to see these people then amongst, even some of my pickleball neighbors have something to do with the skate community, oddly enough. It's just fascinating how the world works. And so this ability for me when I was a kid to not fit in anywhere or feel like I fit in anywhere, but to be observant and just pick up on that everybody's human gave me the, I guess, confidence to know that, yeah, I might not fit in anywhere, but it kind of allows me the opportunity to fit in everywhere. Having two special needs kids, right? We don't fit in with a unique diagnosis. They literally are the only two people to date documented with what they have. So having that, we don't fit in with more or less the other support groups or the other groups of kids that say have Down syndrome or the autism groups. And there's so many outlets and platforms for the people that have those diagnoses. And that's great. We don't necessarily fit into that community, so we kind of had to build our own. And we have found our community mostly in our neighborhood and also the skateboarding community. We were invited to go on a boat ride, which we did, and it was delightful. And then we'd gone on a very different boat ride days before. We'd gone to Catalina. The people were very different, of course, on the different adventures, but the boat to Catalina, we run into one of the workers on the boat. One of the guys that was a captain looked at Sandler and he said, "I know you from skateboarding." And I thought, how crazy is that? I said, yeah, a bunch of guys were showing me your Instagram. And then he took us up into the wheelhouse and showed us around, showed the kids how the boat goes, all the dials and the steering wheel and everything. And it was very exciting. But the cool part was the commonality. That's the skateboarding. I mean, who would have thunk we would have found somebody on this big boat who knew a thing or a gazillion things about skateboarding. And so he and Sandler kind of bonded over the skateboarding thing. And I thought, how wild. Here we are on this boat trip to Catalina, and we meet somebody with a skateboarding background. Well, then later that week, we're invited to go on a different boat ride, and just to kind of do a little harbor cruise. And we get invited by the pickleball group. Ironically enough, one of the gals whose boat it was is from Colorado. And so we get invited to go with a whole different group and have a whole different boating experience. And then we've got all these commonalities with the mountains, and she's got a home in the mountains very close to Vail, Colorado. And we get on that talk, and she said to me, she said, "Nikki, I feel like you've lived a million lives." And I said, yes, I have. I have, because I've screwed up a lot in my past. And so, to make up for it, I just continue to kind of start over and reset and recharge and have a new life. But no, I really feel like I have. But in that same conversation, I thought to myself, the million lives I've led have allowed me to really experience the life of so many different parts, right? I've experienced making hundreds of dollars in a night in a resort town. And I've gone to another town where I didn't have shit. I had to get food stamps. I had to get state assistance. I didn't know how I was going to afford my kids, feed them, get them the medical attention that they needed. I had no idea. And it's allowed me, I think, again, to, although I don't feel like I fit in anywhere, sports kind of came full circle and have brought me around to being able to fit in everywhere. Today's special edition. Again, I'm going to introduce this to everybody with my cheer from my junior high school days. The only time I was ever allowed to be a cheerleader because I came to the table with a lot of terrible cheers. Extra, extra, read all about it. We've got the best stories, no doubt about it. That's the introduction now to special edition. This special edition is dedicated to one of my favorite humans in Vail, Colorado, and that's Adam Merriman. And Adam, unfortunately, passed away a couple weeks ago in a tragic skateboard accident. And things started circulating on social media, and my first thought was, please don't let it be Adam. There was mention of something that had happened to somebody, but not his name. And unfortunately, it was Adam. And I don't think there's anybody that could say a bad thing about Adam. He was probably the most kind-hearted, generous-hearted, big-hearted human I've ever met. And I didn't know him as a pro snowboarder. I knew him as a friend. I knew him as somebody I'd known for years and years and years living amongst that community. He lived at our house in Denver for quite some time. One of my favorite stories was I wanted this fancy door on the house. The one thing I wanted on the house was a fancy rustic door. But instead, somebody that was fixing it up kind of slapped a board on there and made it look rustic. I mean, it would have looked decent, but it was, in Adam's defense, it looked kind of just like it was boarded up. But he had gone to the house. He had lived there for some time. I think he was going over to look at it for the first time. And he called and he said, I can't figure out where I'm supposed to go in because the house is boarded up. I was like, no, that's just a decorative door. God, that's terrible. I could never look at that door the same. And I think anybody who knew Adam would have 5,000 stories. But one that I hadn't thought about, gosh, for years, was right before we departed. And things were getting so tumultuous and just, they were not good in Colorado. And we were all going to go party at this secluded cabin. And half the party had already gone to the cabin. You could only get there via snowmobile or snowcat. And half the party had taken, my kids had gone earlier with half the people we were going to be up there with. And so they'd gotten there, and then the snowcat came back to get us. And it was Adam and myself, and then two fairly unstable, extremely drunk people. And that's not to say we weren't drinking too, but just very different personalities. But we hop in the snowcat, and things did not go well on our ride. A little argument ensued with the other two, not between Adam and I, and he and I were not involved, but it got very contentious. If you don't know what a snowcat is, it's the thing that packs down snow, and it's a huge machine, but there's a little cab that you sit in, and there's not a whole lot of room. So we're all stuffed together in this cab, and this literal fight ensues between my ex and an ex of Adam's. It was so uncomfortable. By this time, we're like halfway between the bottom of the mountain and then back between where the cabin is. And Adam and I gave each other a look like, these two are crazy. They're nuts. we gave each other a look, and he was closest to the door, and snowcat doesn't go very fast. And there's a lot of snow. So I'm like, I think we both had the same idea. We're not going to get hurt. Let's jump out of this thing. So we did. We literally jumped out of the snowcat. And then we started walking. Of course, we hadn't really thought it through. We're in the middle of the dark. I mean, it's dark. Obviously are no lights except for the stars. And we don't have all of our equipment on. Fortunately, I think I had moon boots on. I'm sure he had some adequate boots or footing, but you don't know which way is really up or down. And there's so much snow. And all of a sudden, the snowcat is out of sight. I'm sure we were in trouble or whatever, or they didn't quite know what had happened, but we jumped out. He had mittens, and I didn't have my mittens. And so he shared a mitten with me, and we just started talking. And I think both of us had prepared ourselves for possibly walking for the entire night until it got light, but it's very scary. I mean, you don't know where, if you get off this one path, you're in avalanche territory. And it was probably one of the closest times I was ever near death, honestly, because if we didn't keep moving, I mean, hypothermia, that was a serious possibility. I was absolutely freezing. We had one mitten. If we didn't keep moving, we would have froze to death. If we didn't keep moving, who knows where we would have ended up. You couldn't just stop, but we didn't know which way was up. We didn't know which way was down, really. We were just kind of aimlessly wandering. And I don't know how long. We both had cell phones. One of them was dead. I remember that. We were trying to save the battery for the other one, so we didn't want to start calling people. There was no service where we were, but we wanted to, in the event that something did happen, for like it to signal, at least not be completely shut off. And it was terrifying. But I was with probably the calmest person I could have been with. And it wasn't scary. I mean, it was terrifying knowing, like, now what we were going through, but he was so calming. And it was like the two calm people hopped out of the snowcat, and it was like we were on this just evening stroll in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of the gazillion feet snowbanks, and dear God, let us make it. And we just talked about everything, and it took a few hours, and then finally a snowmobile, and it was somebody that we were supposed to meet. They came looking for everybody, there were the four of us, and eventually the snowcat made it to the cabin, but we end up back at the cabin. And we just shared that experience, and we talked about people we knew, both from growing up in Colorado, and people we'd known from when we were teenagers, and people we'd known, just various aspects of our life, and shared different stories, and just tried to keep each other laughing and smiling. And I think both of us just tried to keep each other from panicking, because it was definitely a situation. I think if I'd been with anybody else, I would have panicked and never imagined that I would have made it out of that safely. And we did. I'll just never forget that was probably one of the closest times I was to a near-death experience, and feeling completely calm, because I was with Adam. And he ended up relocating to Southern California about the same exact time I did. And we would hang out, and it was kind of the calm. He represented, I think, the calm from back when we were in such a tumultuous, crazy situation in Colorado. And for my kids, that was what they always remembered about Adam. He represented all the light times. And so when they get to see him, when we lived in California, there was a comfort there. He moved back after spending some time here, and he started a family. He got married and started a family. And at that time, when he wasn't around as often, the kids, Sandler in particular, I would catch him looking all around the house for Adam and calling for Adam's name. I've got this video I must have watched 1,000 times when I learned of Adam's passing, where Sandler's got his whole entire head in the toilet yelling for Adam. Yeah, I mean, he's just looking, and always would look anywhere and everywhere for Adam. Adam. And to Adam's family, to his family, his friends, all of his fans, because if you met Adam, you were pretty much instantly a fan. my heart goes out to everybody, and you will be sorely missed, Adam Merriman. Tune in next week for an episode all about testosterone. I know I seem like a very strange person to know anything about testosterone, and I didn't until about a week ago. Then I got a crash course. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share. You can find me at adultchicken.com. Also, Apple and Spotify podcasts, Adult Chicken, as well as YouTube, Adult Chicken, and Instagram and TikTok, adult_chicken.